Brazil becomes the first Latin American country to confirm a case of the novel coronavirus. U.S. Democrats gang up on Bernie as he leads the nomination race. And Egypt holds a military funeral for former President Hosni Mubarak. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. Latin America's first recorded case of the novel coronavirus has been confirmed in Brazil. Health authorities said a 61-year-old man in Sao Paulo tested positive for the COVID-19 after returning from a trip to Italy between February 9th and 21st. He will be recovering at home following treatment at one of Brazil's top hospitals, the Albert Einstein in Sao Paulo. Authorities are calling for citizens to remain calm.
With that, when he was confirmed positive from then on, we performed a counter test for safety and control. But from that moment on, we had already started health measures, taking up the case in intensive care practice for him and his contact.
In other news, Venezuela has told foreign officials at the United Nations office in Geneva that disarmament and the control of arms is important to reduce international tensions. Vice Minister for Multilateral Issues Alexander Yanez emphasized the country's support for initiatives intended to achieve this feat at the high-level segment of the Conference on Disarmament.
Venezuela is convinced that disarmament, non-proliferation and the control of arms, along with the intensification of the establishment of confidence-building measures, can contribute to the reduction of existing tensions. Today, more than ever, it is necessary to take advantage of the maximum power existing in the system of disarmament in all cessation and capacity. Mr. President, all speakers who have already spoken before me have emphasized the importance of this conference and its particular character as the only organ with a specific mandate of negotiation and as the legal binding instrument regarding the area of disarmament, and as it has the necessary capacity to take legal action. Mr. President, only the complete elimination of nuclear arms can ensure the self-preservation of humanity. Venezuela supports all initiatives intended to achieve a general complete disarmament, considering that these weapons represent a negation of the human being and to life on the planet. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela supports all of the regional measures that can lead to the creation of a multilateral commitment with a universal character for disarmament. Latin America and the Caribbean is a zone of peace, free of nuclear weapons. As established in the Treaty of 1967 and the Summit of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, as declared so in Havana, Cuba in 2014. There, the heads of state and government adopted a commitment to not permit or give space to armamentism, nuclear devastation or anything similar. Zones free of nuclear weapons constitute an effective medium to strengthen the idea of global prohibition. Venezuela invites all regions to make a concerted effort to reflect this international value and to emphatically condemn any intent to promote and facilitate armament, whatever it manifests.
Meanwhile, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has met with the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross on the sidelines of the 43rd session of the Human Rights Council. Minister Arreaza and Peter Mora discussed cooperation agreements between the Bolivarian country and the humanitarian assistance nonprofit. Shifting gears now, an 11-member Commonwealth observer group has arrived in Guyana to accompany next Monday's general elections. Over the next 3 days, the group will meet the Guyana Elections Commission, political parties and civil society groups, as well as the media and the police. The group's mission is to ensure that all processes are in keeping with Guyana's laws and its regional and international commitments. The group was invited by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, Guyana's ruling coalition has backed the Elections Commission's decision to reduce the use of private residences as polling stations, saying it would make for more credible elections. The opposition has rejected the move to use public buildings or tents instead. Speaking of elections, Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders has defended his political campaign during the party's 10th televised debate in Charleston, South Carolina. Sanders was ganged up on by his rivals who attacked his policies and called him too radical for U.S. citizens in an attempt to slow his momentum. But it's Sanders who has led the polls in previously held caucuses and primaries. Standing firm, the 78-year-old insisted that Democrats ought to target working-class people, reminding that social policies exist and thrive in other countries across the world. He also slammed existing racist legislation.
Misconception, and you're hearing it here tonight, is that the ideas I'm talking about are radical. They're not. In one form or another, they exist in countries all over the world. Healthcare is a human right. We have the necessity, the moral imperative to address the existential threat of climate change. Other countries are doing that. We don't need more people in jail, disproportionately African American, than any other country on earth. Not a radical idea. We have a criminal justice system today that is not only broken, it is racist. Got more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China. And one of the reasons for that is a horrific war on drugs. So I do believe that on day one, we will change the Federal Controlled Substance Act, which, if you can believe it, now equates heroin with marijuana.
Meanwhile, the Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren is once again coming under fire for previously claiming to be a part of the United States indigenous population. More than 200 Cherokees and other Native Americans signed a letter urging Warren to fully retract her past declarations and dispel false beliefs by many white people that they have American Indian ancestry. This follows an investigation that proved $800 million in government contracts reserved for minorities went to companies with dubious claims of being Cherokee or part of Creek Indian tribes. In response, Warren sent a 12-page letter to the authors on Tuesday night, repeating past apologies and reiterating that she is a white woman. We'll take a short break now, so don't go anywhere.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomum. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. In another report from our series, Failure of an Invasion, we look at the truth behind the so-called Venezuela Live Aid concert.
It was none other than Mike Pence, Vice President of the United States, who began the attack on the 22nd of February 2019 with a strategy already used around the world.
Hola, I'm Mike Pence.
Assalamu alaikum.
Nicolas Maduro is a dictator with no legitimate claim to power.
Muammar Gaddafi has lost legitimacy to lead, and he must leave.
On behalf of the American people, we say to all the good people of Venezuela, estamos con ustedes.
We will now stand with you in your struggle to realize the peace and prosperity that freedom can bring.
We will stay with you until democracy is restored and you reclaim your birthright of libertad.
And the aspirations of the Libyan people for freedom, democracy, and dignity must be met.
We are standing with the people of Libya.
We are with you. We stand with you.
Welcome to Venezuela Aid Live!
The first offensive, the Venezuela Live Aid concert. The artillery, the voices of more than 30 international stars who on the day turned their voice into the drums of war.
But what we heard on this side of Cúcuta were winds of war. The Colombian press was here every day reporting on both the concert and the humanitarian aid they had allegedly tried to get into the country. But it was all just show, put up by the media to hide the real intent, the invasion of Venezuela.
A group of artists linked to the Estefan Mafia in Miami.
It is as simple as a Hollywood-style show with Richard Branson. I guess he was offered juicy business deals in exchange for performing at the concert. So he went there.
Because if a billionaire like Richard Branson finances a concert for a country for which he has never before shown any solidarity, this must have been behind his pretended solidarity.
They chose that specific date not because it was important to deliver humanitarian aid to Venezuela on February 22nd, but because it was the day when Richard Branson's company, Virgin Galactic, was launching a spacecraft from the Californian desert.
Bienvenidos, Cúcuta!
Performing at this concert brought Richard Branson's space project much more publicity as well. Meanwhile, on the other side of the border, in Venezuela, there was another concert to promote peace. With the entertainment industry at their service, Colombian politicians made their predictions.
When democracy and economic normality return to Venezuela, the employment generated in Cúcuta will reach impressive levels because the entire reconstruction process will take place there.
They thought that the government of President Nicolás Maduro was going to fall apart on February 22nd. They deceived everyone.
Juan Guaido arrived there. How he had crossed into Colombia beforehand was a mystery until his arrival, when everything became clear.
They took that picture to be some kind of insurance.
I overheard that these photos have to be preserved for the future of the Los Rastrojos group, so that they can move freely across the border without any military pressure, without any pressure from the government. I overheard that this was the part of the deal that led Juan Guaidó cross into Colombia.
The concert was still underway when the first scandal broke out. Venezuelan opposition lawmaker Freddy Superlano, who is also president of the National Assembly's Controller Commission, and his cousin Carlos, who was his assistant, were allegedly drugged by two women in a motel. Later, Superlano's cousin died in the hospital. However, Venezuelan authorities say it's more likely that the two took drugs voluntarily and Carlos died of overdoses. The incident had an unfortunate outcome, but many agree that it's somewhat outrageous that the two men went partying while they were supposed to focus on delivering the humanitarian aid to Venezuela to bring a relief to the crisis. Corruption scandals that followed the Venezuelan Live Aid concert paved the way for the unthinkable, the fragmentation of the Venezuelan opposition, which ultimately turned their backs on Juan Guaido and wrote him off as a corrupt politician. In our next report, we will tell you about the infamous standoff at the border when Guaido and his allies tried to invade Venezuela under the pretext of delivering humanitarian aid.
Now, in some tragic news coming out of Costa Rica, an indigenous leader was murdered in the Taraba region on Monday night. Harry Rivera, aged 23, was helping to defend 13 indigenous families who have been under attack from landowners after they recovered their ancestral lands. Video posted online shows the scene moments after the attack on Rivera. The National Front of Indigenous Peoples in Costa Rica has accused the government of doing nothing to prevent attacks on its people. In some festive news, Carnival celebrations wrapped up on Tuesday night throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. Our correspondent Brand May caught up with one particular street band in Ouro Preto, Brazil.
Brazil has thousands of street drumming groups called blocos of all shapes and sizes, formed in neighborhoods across the country, and each one has its own story. This is the story of Charanga de Lata, a small bloco that was formed to protest the dictatorship during the 1970s.
We were a group of workers at the aluminum plant who started playing together during our lunch break, and so we decided to start a bloco.
As union resistance to the dictatorship grew in the late 70s, the bloco began to appear at strikes and protests, always playing along but never singing. Their silent voices were their form of protesting the government's silencing of the workers.
The aluminium plant workers had little time to fraternize together, but they decided to use their days off to hold protests, and this transformed into a kind of voiceless protest, in which they just beat their drums, which were all secretly made by hand inside the factory.
40 years later, Charanga de Lata has become a beloved local carnival tradition. Brian Mir, Telesur, Ouro Preto.
Well, Trinidad and Tobago's Carnival celebrations saw masqueraders flood streets across the country on Tuesday. The final show is considered pretty mass, with revelers covered in color, feathers, beads and sequins. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley played a sailor with his all-time favorite band, Trinidad All-Stars. He joined people of different shapes and sizes who jumped to soca music while crossing the stage. The most popular song played in front of the judges, Stage Gone Bad by Keste Fantala and Iowa George, won the coveted Road March title. And Dominica also celebrated Carnival with traditional characters like Moko Jumbies or Stilt Walkers being portrayed. Revelers danced behind music trucks to upbeat soca music as spectators lined the streets to get a glimpse of the costumes in all their splendor. A big part of the nation's culture, masqueraders danced and pranced on the final day of the festivities. And we have more stories coming up, so stay with us.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en I.
Dot in the eye. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. A 12th person has died in northern Italy of coronavirus, while the number of confirmed cases has risen to 374, an increase of more than 50 on the day before.
The total number of people affected by the coronavirus is 374, an increase of 52 people infected compared to yesterday's figure. Of the 374 people, we have recorded 12 deaths, and 1 person cured. The last death was recorded in Emilia-Romagna, but it was a patient from Lodi who was 69 years old and had a previous respiratory pathology.
Turning our attention to the Middle East, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has accused United States officials of fear-mongering over the COVID-19 outbreak in his country.
Recently, one of America's top-ranking officials has been talking about coronavirus in Iran. Themselves are struggling with coronavirus. 16,000 people have died of influenza there, but they don't talk about their own. Now, they've turned towards the Iranian people and are talking to them.
Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has called for more regional cooperation in tackling the COVID-19 virus. In a tweet, Zarif said, like other viruses, including terrorism, COVID-19 knows no borders and doesn't distinguish between ethnicities or faiths. Now, China's foreign ministry has dismissed claims by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo accusing Beijing of censorship after it revoked the credentials of 3 Wall Street journalists for publishing a racist editorial on the COVID-19 outbreak.
Mr. Pompeo's remarks completely confused right and wrong. The Chinese government has always adhered to an open, transparent, and highly responsible attitude in the prevention and control of epidemics. The Wall Street Journal's insulting headline against China is not about freedom of speech and the press at all. Anyone with a conscience should resolutely oppose and resist such racist wrong words and deeds.
Indian police have reinforced security in the capital, New Delhi, as the number of people killed in protests against the citizenship law rose to 22. Police have blocked roads to restrict movement in the capital and imposed restrictions on large gatherings in the area, as mostly anti-Muslim rioters set fire to buildings and vehicles and attacked journalists. At least 200 people have been injured in the violence. The new citizenship law has raised concerns that Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants to remold India into a Hindu nation by marginalizing the country's 200 million Muslims.
Our Hindu brothers' houses were attacked by people throwing stones, and our Muslim brothers' houses were also attacked. Since my childhood, we haven't heard of such violence between Hindus and Muslims, but now we are hearing this.
There was a stone throw, chanting, and shops being looted. People fled their homes here, and bullets were being fired for a long time. After 3 hours, some police came, and only then did the situation come under control.
South African trade unions and social movements are marching to Parliament ahead of the 2020 budget presentation by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. The unions are unhappy with some austerity measures that Mboweni is expected to unveil this Wednesday, including an increase in value-added tax, a wage freeze for all public service workers, and the retrenchment of thousands from state-owned enterprises. Mboweni says these measures are necessary to revive the ailing economy, but unions argue they will hurt the poor. Senegal has inaugurated West Africa's first large-scale wind farm, which is expected to supply 15% of the country's power. The 156-megawatt power plant located north of the capital, Dakar, was launched by President Macky Sall, who has pushed for cleaner sources of energy since coming into power. The country's first solar plant came online 3 years ago, and the government has since built several more. The G5 Sahel General Assembly has started in Mauritania. Representatives from Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, and Niger gathered in the capital, Nouakchott, to discuss security matters affecting West Africa. Now, during the summit, Mauritania is set to assume the rotating G5 Sahel presidency, tasked with coordinating the fight against irregular armed groups in the region. Meanwhile, Mauritania's President Mohamed Ghazouani has warned that the conflict in Libya poses a threat to the security and development of the entire Sahel region. Ghazwani said instability in Libya has created a fertile ground for illicit activities such as trafficking of arms, humans, and drugs. The Sahel region is battling an onslaught by armed groups that have killed more than 10,000 people since 2016.
Despite several international initiatives, the Libyan crisis continues to deepen and become more complex. Unfortunately, it continues to fuel and strengthen the activities of terrorist groups in the Sahel through the illicit trafficking of arms, munitions, drugs, and human beings.
56 Palestinians, including 2 journalists, have been injured after Israeli forces used live ammunition and rubber-coated steel bullets to disperse a protest against U.S. President Donald Trump's so-called Middle East peace plan. The protesters had taken to the streets for a peaceful demonstration in Taysir village in the occupied West Bank before Israeli soldiers arrived and violently suppressed the event. The Red Crescent confirmed treating and evacuating dozens of people to a nearby hospital. Egypt has held a military funeral for former President Hosni Mubarak, who died on February 25th after a long illness. The government has declared 3 days of national mourning for Mubarak, who led the country for nearly 3 decades before he was forced to step down during the so-called Arab Spring. Before becoming president in 1981, Mubarak served as the country's Air Force commander and earned accolades for the role he played during the war with Israel in 1973. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurienglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media for Telesur English. I'm Doris Polo. Thanks for watching.